In August 2000, Russia's Northern Fleet Summer X, a large-scale 3-day naval training exercise in the Barents Sea, had ended in disaster. On August 12, 2000, at 11:28 a.m., 2 consecutive explosions rocked the ocean, one of them reading 3.5 on the Richter scale. Contact with the Kursk, an Oscar II nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine, was lost. However, the Northern Fleet didn't launch a search and rescue effort until 12 hours after the explosions. They found the Kursk lying on the sea floor, severely damaged, but there were apparently survivors on board. Rescuers could hear the tapping of what sounded like an SOS. 2 days after the accident, news broke worldwide. The Naval Press Office lied through their teeth, and admirals constantly contradicted each other in the news. The Kursk crew's families in the garrison town of Ijeva didn't know what was happening, or whether their loved ones were even on board the Kursk at that time. The Navy had yet to release the list of all those on board at the time of the accident. Many countries offered Russia assistance to help rescue the Kursk crew. But Russian officials feared the West would use the rescue effort to spy on their highly classified boat, and they declined all outside help. They could handle it themselves. However, the Russian rescuers had defective equipment. After the Soviet Union broke apart 10 years ago, military spending had been severely cut, and maintenance had taken a back seat. While sailors were fighting to survive, Russian President Vladimir Putin was shown on TV still enjoying his vacation on the Black Sea coast. The repeated failures of the Navy to save the men and President Putin's seeming indifference made the public mad, and the press let it rip. After 4 days of fruitless attempts to connect their badly maintained submersibles to the Kursk to get the sailors out, President Putin ordered the defense minister to accept help from wherever it may come. The offer from the ultra-spy nation, the United States of America, was declined. But on Wednesday, the 16th of August, the Navy accepted help from Norway and Great Britain. Norway would send highly specialized deep-sea saturation divers, and Britain would send the LR-5, a high-tech rescue submersible. On Wednesday afternoon, Graham Mann, the offshore manager aboard the Seaway Eagle, got the call he'd been expecting since first hearing about the Kursk. A senior manager at Stolt Offshore told Mann to plan an immediate deployment to the Barents Sea. The multi-million-dollar project for Statoil had to be abandoned, but Statoil didn't care. Lives were in peril, and a rapid response was essential. The Norwegian government would pay Stolt Offshore, and Statoil would be compensated. At 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday evening, Mann told his supervisors, "We are abandoning the project, reverse the operation, bring the riser back on board." The Seaway Eagle's captain, Dag Rasmussen, didn't even have charts for the Barents Sea, so he borrowed some from a nearby supply boat. They first had to swing by Tromsø to take on the saturation divers and extra kit. When the LR-5 landed in Trondheim Wednesday evening, British Rescue Commander Alan Hoskins expected to be met by a Russian delegation of technicians with plans and an interpreter. There was no one. This did not bode well. The families were frustrated. At the meetings the Navy organized on the base, they heard nothing new. They were only told not to watch the sensationalist independent TV for news, but to keep their eyes on state-controlled TV stations like RTR and ORT. On Wednesday evening, a little over 100 hours after the explosions rocked the Barents Sea, the diving platform Seaway Eagle was underway. Stolt's administrators tracked down experienced saturation divers and put them on the next flight to Tromsø to meet up with the Eagle. British Commodore David Russell, in charge of the British part of the operation, got clearance to fly to the Kola Peninsula, go directly to the site, and work with the Chief of the Northern Fleet, Admiral Vyacheslav Popov, aboard the nuclear battlecruiser Peter the Great. They were half an hour away from crossing into Russian airspace when they received the message that their permission to fly into Russia had been revoked. It is no longer convenient to receive a British delegation. Russell and his team were livid. This wasn't about convenience. This was about saving people's lives. They weren't a delegation. They were professional submariners on a rescue mission. The Russians acted as though they were flying in on B-52 bombers. Defense Ministry hardliners in Moscow had, reluctantly, accepted help. But they'd be damned if they allowed a single Royal Navy officer to land on Russian territory, especially someone like Russell, who had spied on the Russians in the very sea that Kursk was lying in. Russell and his team set up shop in a hotel and spent a day trying to negotiate their way onto the Russian flagship. The mission got a code name: the Injured Red Lady. Finally, Russell gave up. He would helicopter out to the Norman Pioneer as she made her passage around the North Cape on Friday. With the Cold War chill obviously still hanging in the air, this mission was going to be tough. It was Thursday, August 17th, 2000. The Kursk had been stranded for 5 days. Her interior temperature was steadily dropping and the crew's condition was unknown. Meanwhile, the world started wondering, where were the country's top leaders? More specifically, where was the president? Russia had entered a new era. During Soviet times, a president didn't have to talk to anyone about anything if he didn't want to, and the public had always remained calm and silent. But now the public was furious and loud. Putin hadn't received the memo and continued enjoying his vacation. When the press heard that he hadn't cancelled the summit meeting in Yalta with leaders of the former Soviet states scheduled for the next day, they let it rip. Izvestia fumed. The sailors dying in the Barents Sea couldn't interrupt the summer vacations of our statesmen. They have a picnic on the shore with a view of the drowning men. Komsomolskaya Pravda wondered, the sailors on the Kursk fell silent yesterday. Why has the president been silent? Western leaders had showed compassion and offered help the second news about the accident broke. But for the past 5 days, Putin, the supreme commander of Russia's armed forces, had nothing to say. Why on earth did the president think it was possible to keep silent for 5 days? Critics drew comparisons between Putin and Tsar Nicholas II. During the notorious Kadinka Field incident in 1896, peasants had gathered to celebrate the coronation of the new Tsar when 1,000 of them were trampled to death in a stampede. The clueless Tsar just went ahead with the ceremonies. Officials kept reassuring the Russians that Putin was receiving reports from the Defense Ministry every 2 hours. A presidential visit to the Kola Peninsula would only disrupt the rescue efforts. But while the world watched Putin continue to enjoy his vacation, they also watched desperate wives begging the Navy for more information. 5 days on, and the crew list had yet to be released. The Navy wouldn't even say how many were on board, with estimates ranging from 112 to 130. They told the press that there was no need to publish the list. All the families had been notified. Have some respect. Well, none of the families had been notified. How is that for respect? One determined Komsomolskaya Pravda reporter was like, challenge accepted. Vladimir Shkoda had been on the hunt for pictures of the Kursk wives and children waiting for their husbands and fathers. He had no idea who they even were. For 3 whole days, we tried to get our hands on that list to tell our people who are fighting for survival out there who it is tapping out SOS in the submarine. Shkoda was told that the crew list was for sale for 18,000 rubles, about $600. The source was a very senior officer at Northern Fleet Headquarters. To protect the officer's anonymity, Shkoda had to go to Severomorsk and follow strict instructions. It was a dilemma. Should they publish the list? On the one hand, it would devastate the families who discovered their men were on the Kursk, but then again, other families might be relieved to find that their men were safe. And yet other families might be shocked to discover that their men had actually transferred to the Kursk without them knowing. Škoda decided to get the list. Severomorsk base was more accessible than Vyjevo, though you still needed a pass to get in. He enlisted the help of 2 local reporters who had the right forged documents. Following the instructions, the men waited by a bus stop on a deserted back street in the town. A thick envelope was thrown out of a fast-moving car. They never saw the driver's face, but they had the list. At 6 p.m. Thursday evening, Navy Chief Admiral Kuryedov had arrived at the wreck site to oversee the operation in person. Kuryedov declared that the sailors had emergency supplies that would last at least another week, and they had enough air to last another 8 days. The admiral did not say where he got this new information or what it was based on. The families and the Russian public assumed that he, the man in charge of the entire Navy, had access to the best and most reliable calculations. The families breathed a sigh of relief. With another 8 days to go, the foreign rescuers could definitely save the men from what the submariners refer to as the Iron Coffin. Several more experienced pilots had arrived on the Russian rescue vessel, the Mikhail Ratnetsky, including the best of them all, Captain Andrei Sholokhov, to pilot the Pris. Thursday afternoon, the Pris had been relaunched. Sholokhov attempted to set the Pris down over the hatch, battling the current. This is what he had been training for his entire career. He got really close, only a few feet out. Now, close to 7 p.m., the SB-523 was towing the Beaster back to the site through rough seas, and then the towing cable broke because of an improperly installed towing bracket. They had to get a new tug. Sholokhov tried again and again and again. 8 times he tried to get a lock on the hatch. The priest connected to the little rod protruding from the hatch twice. They needed the rod to lock the submersible in position, but when they opened the valve, they couldn't create the vacuum to clamp the mini-sub in position. During the final attempt, the highly skilled and hyper-focused Sholokhov managed to hold the position for nearly 20 minutes. Still, he couldn't get the priest to connect to the cofferdam. Something had to be wrong with the hatch mechanism. Perhaps it was damaged or distorted by the explosion. Sholokhov couldn't judge whether there were any distortions, only divers could. Sholokhov and Pirtsev had pushed the priest to the very limit of her capacity, trying every maneuver they could think of. But with battery power and air running low, the priest had to surface. They were devastated. Close to midnight on Thursday, the Beaster arrived on site and was docked to the Ratnetsky. During towing, the underwater rescue vehicle had damaged its antenna of the guidance station, general hydraulics, echo sounders, and the battery. The crew got right on repairing the Beaster. Thursday afternoon, 24 hours after Admiral Skorgin had requested technical data on the Kursk hatch system mechanism, a Northern Fleet staff officer dropped off a thick brown envelope at the Norwegian consulate in Murmansk. They were rough hand drawings of an Oscar II escape tower from different angles, and the Russian in the margins was illegible, no different from what British Naval Attaché Jeff McCready was given yesterday. Skorgin called Admiral Popov again and put his foot down. Just send over technicians to Tromsø, where the Seaway Eagle would pick up the divers. Popov hedged. They would get more information once they got to the scene. Skorgin insisted that they needed the data yesterday. And another thing, the Russians weren't accepting help only to save face, by any chance. There were still people to rescue, right? Popov told the admiral that the Northern Fleet wasn't in the business of wasting people's time and effort. The admiral compromised. Rescue Chief Rear Admiral Gennady Virich would join the Seaway Eagle. He would do double duty, watching the Norwegians' every move and making sure the Western specialist got the right amount of information. Enough, but not too much. Progress at last. But then the alarm went off at Skorgen's base. 2 Russian Ilyushin Il-38 anti-submarine aircraft threatened to invade NATO's northern airspace. What the flying aircraft? The Russian Il-38s were flying low and slow, crisscrossing the sea off Norway's western coast. This was highly unusual post-Cold War behavior. Skorgen was like, "Are you kidding me right now?" He was mobilizing Norwegian rescuers to help the Russian Navy, and that same Navy was acting all aggressive along Norway's coast. 2 NATO F-16 fighter jets took off to check out the Russian planes. The pilots reported back that it looked like the Russians were involved in a major submarine hunt. They were dropping sonobuoys in the water and working their way across the ocean in a methodical pattern. Astonished that the Russians were now virtually at his doorstep, Skorgen once again picked up the phone to speak to Popov. "Explain yourself." Yeah, well, Russian intelligence told Popov that a Western submarine collided with the Kursk and they were looking for that submarine. Skorgen didn't know about any Western submarine activity in the Barents Sea, but if there had been a collision, the Russians should look for that second submarine right next to the Kursk, not along the Norwegian coast. Popov was unapologetic. "I can only repeat what I've already said. This is the information I have. This is what I believe." Later that day, Russia's Northern Fleet reported that it had located a Los Angeles-class fast attack submarine. She was moving south along Norway's western coast at a surface speed of 5 knots. She was clearly limping toward Bergen for repairs. The report was transmitted all over the world and made the Russian claim that the tragedy had a Western cause all the more plausible. In Russia, it stoked the anti-American sentiment. On Friday, August 18, 2000, 2 Il-38s repeated the near intrusion in Norway, tracking what the Russians claimed was the USS Memphis. The American government made no effort to deny that any American subs had been in the vicinity of the sunken Kursk, but they refused to admit that any of their assets were involved in the accident. Lo and behold, the distinctive profile of a Los Angeles-class nuclear-powered fast-attack submarine docked at a pier at the Håkonsvern submarine base outside the city of Bergen in Norway. The USS Memphis surfaced. After her 8-week northern run and 6 days after the Kursk accident, the USS Memphis made her long-scheduled stop for crew leave. Their mission had been successful, though the crew feared that her mast had been spotted during the exercise. Sadly, the mission had ended in them witnessing the death of fellow submariners. In Russia, the docking of the Memphis in Norway was seen as evidence that the American submarine had collided with the Kursk. She was obviously there for repairs. Well, Håkonsvern was a regular stop for American submarines. This is where commanders unloaded the gathered acoustic and electronic spy data. The spooks on the boat disembarked here as well so they could fly home, sparing themselves a long, tedious journey across the Atlantic inside a cramped sub. The Russian government formally requested permission to inspect the Memphis to look for signs of structural damage, but the Americans refused. From the US Navy's perspective, that would set a very dangerous precedent. They didn't need to prove a negative. Norwegian admirals from the Håkonsvern base did do a quick check, but they found no damage. When the Memphis docked, a clever US Embassy official obtained clearance and quickly staged a photo shoot. Russian photographers were invited to participate. At least one of them did, along with some local reporters. None of the photos revealed anything wrong with the sub, and she was at a pier and not in a dry dock, so any damage below the waterline must have been minor. But no one in Russia believed it. The tapes that were offloaded here were sent to highly specialized naval facilities in Virginia and Maryland to be analyzed. The analysts concluded that both high-pitched audio spikes saturating the mics were explosions. The horrible sounds of a submarine going down. Early Friday morning, Russia had woken up to the Komsomolskaya Pravda headline, 18,000 rubles for the names of the sailors of the Kursk. There were 118 names on the list. A lot of families had their fears confirmed. Some families found out that their loved ones were not on board, while still other families only now discovered that their family members had boarded the Kursk. Other media outlets were fuming with rage that Russia had been withholding this information in the first place, and that bribery was apparently the Navy's stock in trade. Meanwhile, Putin was in Yalta and gave an interview. He calmly explained that when Marshal Shurjayev had informed him of the disaster, he had asked about the crew's chances. The hope for rescue was minimal, but there was still a possibility. He believed that the Northern Fleet could handle it and that everyone should just stay in their place. The crisis was emotionally affecting Putin, especially because he knew the ship's commander, Gennady Lyachin. Of course, my first wish was to fly to the region, to the fleet base, in order to study the situation on the spot. I just restrained myself from doing this. I think I made the correct decision, because the arrival in the disaster area of high-ranking officials and bureaucrats who are not specialists does not help rescue either people or equipment, and in many cases actually hinders. And then there was the raging polar storm that caused the delay in the rescue operations. And of course the currents and the visibility didn't help either. In hindsight, it is obvious that either Putin wasn't told the truth by his admirals, or that he was lying through his teeth. Putin's remarks, although well received by most people, did little to stop his lack of concern from being played again and again by certain news sources. Criticism was intense. The popular media, controlled by the oligarchs that Putin hated with a passion and who hated Putin right back, were broadcasting footage of a carefree president enjoying his vacation pretty much on a loop. It was starting to look ridiculous. Political opponents raged that Commander-in-Chief Putin should have been out there to show support for his naval personnel, or the families, or both. Reporters started to harp on the fact that Putin had been aware of the abysmal state of the Navy, and that he had sent the sailors to their deaths by approving the summer war games. 9 a.m. Friday morning. Norway's chartered Seaway Eagle refueled in Tromsø and upgraded to a fully fledged diving support vessel at an insane speed. Members of the Norwegian Radiation Protection Authority, translators, and 12 deep-sea specialists from Norwegian oil fields and British military prepared to board. They held a brief meeting to map out what they would do and, more importantly, what they would not do. Western intelligence agencies would love to get their hands on any data they collected. The team would not do anything for them. They were rescuers, not spies. After only 3 hours, a record speed, the Seaway Eagle was ready to leave at noon. Normally, reconfiguring the Eagle for a saturation diving operation took an entire day. But they were able to forgo one safety requirement that took a long time to prepare, a hyperbaric lifeboat for divers to escape to when they got in trouble. They were allowed to leave without it, as long as the hyperbaric system would be available at a nearby port ASAP. The Eagle's captain Rasmussen plotted a course on his borrowed charts, a journey of about 36 hours. They would arrive over the Kursk by Saturday evening, 1 week after the accident. But the team still hadn't gotten reliable information from the Russians. Graham Mann wanted to figure out how the Russians had designed the hatches. He downloaded a picture of the assumed layout of an Oscar II class submarine off of the internet. The sub was highly classified, of course. Friday morning, the Beaster was fixed and ready to be deployed. Alexander Kalgin and Dmitry Podkopayev were her pilots, risking their lives working with inferior rescue equipment. The Beaster launched but got in trouble right away. The device was lifted aboard for troubleshooting. In their rush to get going, someone forgot to close the battery cover. The DSRV was launched 30 minutes later at 11 a.m. As the Beaster began to dive, it toppled over because the seawater flowed into her sturdy hull through a defective valve of the ballast exchange system. The Beaster was leaking. The crew shut down all unnecessary electrical equipment because they needed all the battery power they could get to blow and go. The mini-sub settled on the seafloor. When the Radnetsky had cleared the water above them, they blew ballast and surfaced. With the second compartment partially flooded, the sub started sinking. One lightning-fast crane operator on the Radnetsky managed to hook her and bring the vessel safely alongside. The Kursk rescue effort was getting dangerous. They nearly lost the sub and could have lost the crew. As soon as she was fixed, the Beaster made several dives and attempted to dock 3 times on the Kursk's rescue hatch, and failed. Again. Between the priests and the Beaster, they had tried and were unable to dock 13 times. The rescue crew was desperate. Should they wait for foreign assistance or keep trying with the DSRVs? The men had pride in their country, belief in their navy, and a desire to win. They couldn't sit and do nothing. Once the precious batteries were recharged, they'd go again. 10 hours later, at 10:30 p.m., the priests went back into the water. Due to a broken underwater object detection sensor, the Radnetsky's guidance system would point her in the right direction. This didn't work, and the priest surfaced again an hour later. At 1 o'clock on Friday afternoon, Vijayeva was abuzz with rumors. Moscow was sending representatives over to talk to the families on Putin's behalf. Sure enough, Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Ilya Klebanov, the head of the Commission of Inquiry, showed up with the regional governors of Murmansk and Kursk. The region Kursk was very proud of its namesake submarine. Its citizens often send the crew and their families gifts, like shirts, socks, equipment, television, whatever they needed. They even held annual contests for local young men to win a slot to serve on the Kursk. In fact, 7 sailors from the region were on the submarine at this time. At 5:30 p.m., the trio faced a crowd that was beyond frustrated. Some families were openly wailing, while others stared them down in silent fury. Klebanov figured, the people just need some information. He started rattling off all the awesome ships and admirals that were involved in the rescue, but this crowd was unimpressed. What were their chances of success? Klebanov said. The situation is still unclear, but we're trying everything within our power to save your men and bring them safely to the surface. Nadezhda Tilik was fed up with hearing yet another contradiction from the officials. She jumped up. Swine! Our sons are paid $50 a month, and now they're locked in this tin can. What did I raise my son for? Do you have children? Of course you don't have children. Klebanov looked uncomfortable. Some in the crowd were stunned, others egged Nadezhda on. Why don't you understand what I'm saying? Who can understand us? Not you people of power, you never understand anything. You only think about getting fat. Our sailors have nothing to live on and often have no work. I'm sick of this mess. Various naval officers hurried over to her to calm her down, and a nurse approached her from behind holding a syringe. Nadezhda wasn't done. My husband served for 25 years. Why? And now our son is buried there. I will never forgive you. Take off your insignia. You're so proud of your decorations. Take them off immediately." As a naval officer tried to hug Nadezhda to calm her, the nurse plunged the needle into her side. "You better shoot yourselves now. We will not let you live in peace, bastards." Nadezhda collapsed, and they eased her out of the row of seats and onto a gurney. Klebanov was too stunned to say anything. The cameras and the press were immediately ushered out of the room. Though it was all captured on camera, the dramatic event was not shown in Russia. But when the footage aired in the West a few days later, it was a PR disaster. All Westerners saw was a mother who had a right to be upset being forcibly silenced by, judging from how fast it worked, a horse tranquilizer. That was some Soviet KGB crap. Naval officials in Vijayeva later confirmed that Tilik was given a sedative, and they said, "We've been giving sedatives to relatives since this began, and it's not such a big deal as you make it out to be in the West. We are simply protecting the relatives from undue pain. It was for her own protection." Although Tilik's husband said that he had asked the nurse to help his wife and give her a shot, the video showed that this was not the case. 4 months later, Nadezhda said that her husband had said it to protect her, but she also said, "The injection was done to shut my mouth." After hearing about this, the president figured, maybe I should not continue my vacation. He decided not to return to Sochi from Yalta and go straight back to Moscow. That Friday evening, Commodore Russell helicoptered out to the Normand Pioneer. Klebanov said that there had been 3 foreign subs in the area at the time of the accident, and one of them hit the Kursk. The collision theory was supported by every Russian official ever. But with more and more lies being revealed, conspiracy theories became a free-for-all. The press was gobbling it all up. American officials kept repeating no US sub was involved in the Kursk accident. However, now U.S. Defense Secretary William Cohen went on record to categorically deny that U.S. subs were involved in the Kursk accident in any way, shape, or form. But then, CIA Director George Tenet made a sudden appearance in Moscow on Friday afternoon. The conspiracy theorist went wild. This proved everything. The US submarines had collided with the Kursk or fired a torpedo at the sub. A furious President Putin and an embarrassed President Clinton made a secret agreement during their 25-minute talk on Wednesday. The US would halt their missile shield plan, or billions of dollars of debt would be wiped off Russia's ledgers. CIA Chief Tenet was here to seal the deal. American officials said, "Nonsense," but they were not interested in explaining their denials further. Tenet's meeting was actually part of a not-so-secret visit to Eastern Europe that he started on Monday in Bulgaria. In the meantime, at 4:40 Saturday morning, Putin quietly snuck back into Moscow. Just after midnight, the Seaway Eagle was making good progress in near-perfect weather. After being briefed on the potential hazards like damaged nuclear reactors and weapons, jagged material, and loose debris, all 14 divers had to sign a special accident waiver form. They agreed to die without the hyperbaric lifeboat and not to hold Stolt responsible for radiation injuries. The ROVs would constantly monitor radiation, and each diver had a Geiger counter. Every diver was asked individually if he was prepared physically and emotionally to work on the Kursk. It would not be seen as a sign of weakness if they pulled out now. All agreed to continue. So what is deep-sea saturation diving exactly? The deeper a person goes underwater, the more the external pressure on his body increases. A body can adjust to this. but gases build up in the body that once back on the surface will form bubbles in the tissues and bloodstream. This incredibly painful condition is known as decompression sickness, the bends, and can result in death. But like very slowly moving a cork off a champagne bottle, a diver must decompress his body slowly to remove the gases and avoid the bends when surfacing. Because it is time-consuming to decompress, divers remain at the underwater pressure level in pressurized chambers on the ships. 3 divers are lowered down in a pressurized diving bell. 2 divers slip into the water, and a 3rd one stays inside the bell to monitor pressure, air, communication, and warm water flow to the divers' suits. Because it is time-consuming to decompress, it can take days, divers remain at the underwater pressure level in pressurized chambers on the ships. When they finish the day's work on a seafloor, they return to their cramped, pressurized living quarters where they sleep, eat, and drink. They remain there for the duration of the project. Once the project is completed, divers spend a few more days in the chamber that slowly lowers the pressure until they're back to surface pressure and can leave the habitat. Needless to say, this is a dangerous job and not for everyone. At 11 a.m., exactly 1 week after the explosion sent the Kursk crashing to the seafloor, the Seaway Eagle and her divers entered the Barents Sea. The Normand Pioneer, carrying the LR-5 and her divers, was an hour ahead of them. If the foreigners were expecting a warm welcome, they got crickets. No one in the Northern Fleet acknowledged their arrival. It was as if no one wanted them there. It was challenging to figure out who was in charge. The Westerners and Russians had to work together with multiple ships under multiple commanders and different objectives. There was no common communication system, no common language, or common protocol. And unlike the Western commanders, the Russian commanders needed approval for every little thing. Meanwhile, Saturday afternoon, the Beaster was fixed and ready to go into the water. When she got to the Kursk, the pilot tried 4 times to land on the hatch. The strong undercurrent made it impossible. At 6 p.m. Saturday evening, Virich concluded the Beaster failed because the hatch was damaged. The Normand Pioneer signaled the Peter the Great that they would arrive at 9 p.m. They were ordered to remain 15 miles away from the site. This was over the horizon. Infuriating. When Russell demanded an explanation, the Northern Fleet officials claimed that they needed to prepare the area. But really, the Russians were terrified of the LR-5. Virich didn't know this, but 6 of the British divers on the Normand Pioneer were special forces from the Special Boat Service. This branch of the Navy was all about sabotage, intelligence gathering, reconnaissance, and demolition. Spying at a depth of 350 feet was a walk in the park for these guys. However, there was no evidence that they were planning to spy. The Royal Navy denied it anyway. But had Virich known? At 8 p.m., the Priest was relaunched. With her guidance system still broken, the Peter the Great would once again direct the submersible to the Kursk. Team coordinator Captain Svensson wanted everyone to agree on a plan of action and get technical data before they arrived on the scene. So he flew in all the players for a meeting on the Seaway Eagle. Rear Admiral Virich, Commodore Russell, Captain Svensson, and Manager Graham Mann were all present. Admiral Popov was still coordinating the Russian rescue effort. The situation was super awkward. The Seaway Eagle's staff were dressed all casual, some still in dirty overalls. The Russians were prim and proper in their naval uniforms. It became awkwarder. The Russians seemed afraid to sign an attendance sheet and waited for Virich to tell them what to do. Russell quickly reassured Virich if he was worried about a security threat, the Russians could remain on board and watch everything they did. Finally, the Russians agreed to reveal their identity. Awkwarder, Virich began a long, formal speech in which he profusely thanked the Western specialist for helping in Russia's hour of need. Nobody had time for this protocol. They needed data, and they needed it now. Greyman interrupted the Admiral. Surely, speed is of the essence. Let me explain what we can achieve with our equipment and our divers, and then you must be clear about what you want us to do. Virich listened to Man's explanation of the plan. Nope. They had concluded that everyone was dead and the LR-5 was no longer needed. Virich said, "We want the diving bell to land on the submarine and for the divers to enter the Kursk to confirm that it is completely flooded." You want us to do what now? You want us to just open the hatch and flood the Kursk? Did the Russian Navy already know the pressures were equal on both sides of the hatch? And you can't land a bell on a submarine, it's just an elevator for divers. Virich then announced that the Russians would continue their own rescue efforts for another 24 hours. Alone. The Russians would decide whether they'd grant the Western team's permission to get started at noon on Sunday. Russell couldn't imagine waiting another day. The LR-5 had to be launched immediately. He implored Virich to check out the high-tech piece of equipment for himself. He could see that her rubber skirt could match with any hatch. Unlike the Beaster and the Priest, she didn't need to be lined up perfectly. Virich was like, "Nah, I'm good." He left. Virich wasn't stupid. He was just stalling. Despite Putin's order, the Northern Fleet officers and commanders in Moscow were still fighting. Most commanders in Moscow wanted to protect Russia's naval secrets and avoid international humiliation. Some Northern Fleet officials felt it was already too late. Others thought they should let the foreigners work their magic and remove all doubt about what was going on in the Kursk. Popov's deputy, Matsak, believed the optimists were toying with people's emotions. He volunteered to put a stop to it. That evening, half an hour after the Normand Pioneer arrived and 1 hour before the Seaway Eagle arrived on the scene, Matsak interrupted a television program to announce it was almost certainly too late to save a soul. He said, "Hard as it is to say this, our worst expectations have come true. It is the gravest disaster that I, as a sailor, have known in the history of the submarine fleet." The Kursk's entire front end, where most of the sailors would have been working, flooded in the first seconds of the accident. Those working there would have died in minutes. The Kursk was divided into 10 watertight sections. Admiral Matsak said that the water gradually filled the stern of the boat. The men trapped in the aft section knocked for 2 days, signaling rising water pressure. He said, "The crew in the compartments in the stern were telling us the water was filtering into their sections and they wanted us to provide air. As the water slowly filled, the pressure built up inside the stern compartments, inevitably reducing the life expectancy of the crew. But since the tapping had stopped on Monday," he said, "regrettably, in effect, we have crossed the critical boundary of assuring the life of the crew. They should rescue survivors, but it was increasingly likely that it would turn into a salvage operation." The Brits didn't believe it. "You need confirmation." Soon after hearing Matsak's statement, Russell declared to the British media that the team would fight on until they were ordered to leave. The Seaway Eagle arrived at 10 p.m. Saturday evening. They were also ordered to stay away from the disaster scene. With no plan in place, the team had to sit and wait. Man decided to move 2 diving teams into saturation and blow them down to 328 feet, 100 meters, a 3-hour process. For 2 long hours, the Western rescue team heard nothing from the Russians. Then, at last, a small boat headed toward the Eagle from the warship Admiral Chubanenko. Chief Rescue Officer Virich got back on board to take charge of the next phase of the operation, this time without the British delegation. Late that Saturday evening, the priest couldn't locate the Kursk. The guidance of the Peter the Great was terrible. she surfaced again. The propulsion system was messed up. Something was wrong with the hydraulics. Man was again meeting with the Russians. He demanded fast, clear decisions. Let's get that ROV in the water to do a survey pronto. Perfectly legit request, but Virich was like, nope. He would not allow any cameras to survey the entire sub. The foreigners had to stay at the Kursk stern and could not move forward of the emergency buoy located between the 7th and 8th compartment. Man was stunned. This was standard operating procedure. Map out the danger zones. Mark the weapons and jagged debris lying on the sea floor. Mark anything sharp that could cut lifelines of the divers. Mark the location of the conning tower and the propellers. They had no idea what the Russian sub even looked like. Man showed Virich the downloaded diagram of the Oscar II submarine to point out the danger zones. What if that emergency buoy suddenly deployed? It could hit the divers, the bell, or the thrusters of the Eagle. Virich glanced at the internet plans and was like, there is no buoy in that position on the hull of the Kursk. Don't worry about it. The sun was coming up. They were going nowhere, very slowly. Virich was still playing for time, throwing up obstacles, finding reasons to say no. To be fair, it was clear that Virich struggled to balance the demands of his superiors and the demands of the situation on the scene. With nothing agreed, Man made a final appeal to the Admiral. He said, "We're all humans. We all want the same thing. Let's work together now and save some lives." Virich was like, "Tell me your plans again." Man was close to pulling his hair out. This was not hard work for his divers. Operating complex hatches and valves underwater was second nature to them. He said, "We want to get on with our job. We're diving professionals. We do this for a living." Virich smiled and said, "Let's do it." Virich signed off on the dive plan 45 minutes later. It was 4 a.m. Sunday morning, August the 20th. They had wasted 8 hours. The Eagle's high-tech monitoring equipment wasn't allowed forward of the reactor compartment, and everyone on the Seaway Eagle had to hand over their cell phones. 20 minutes later, the Seaway Eagle finally headed for the wreck site. At 6:30 a.m., the Russian rescue ship, the Mikhail Ratnetsky, raised anchor to make way for the Eagle. At 8 a.m., Captain Rasmussen maneuvered the Seaway Eagle to precisely 100 meters, or 328 feet, behind the Kursk stern. Reporters invaded Murmansk to get as close to the rescue site as they could, but only Russian state-controlled RTR was allowed aboard the fleet. The reporters got bored with nothing to report and started comparing notes and finding contradictions in naval press releases. Then rumors started buzzing around that the Northern Fleet had sunk the submarine with one of their own missiles fired from the Peter the Great. The Navy denied any missile misfirings and stuck to the collision theory. But the reporters were having a field day now, launching conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory. Meanwhile, the Normand Pioneer had been given permission to move closer to 5 nautical miles from the wreck site. The Norwegian team deployed the ROV SCV-006 or 06. A young Norwegian pilot steered this remotely operated vehicle using a joystick. 06 hovered 160 feet above the sea floor looking for the Kursk. The ROV saw nothing. The 06 pinged the Kursk. The sonar received no signal. There was nothing there. The rescuers had anticipated many problems, but finding a submarine the size of 2 jumbo jets hadn't been one of them. The Russians had given them the precise coordinates, so were those coordinates wrong? Were they messing with them, or were they lying again? 06 moved around in various search patterns for minutes. Finally, a faint signal pinged back off the huge bronze propellers. The team was in awe. The acoustic tiles on the Kursk simply absorbed the ROV's active sonar. The 06 went in to start the inspection. Virich was watching the video feed aboard the Eagle and started to shout and pointing at the screen. There was a crack on the starboard side of the escape hatch. To the team's expert eyes, the hatch looked in excellent condition. The crack was just a bad joint between acoustic tiles. But Virich wanted it to be a crack. He needed it to be a crack. It would explain why they had failed to dock for 7 days. At 11 a.m. Sunday morning, the Eagle lowered the diving bell with Tony Scott, Paul Dinesen and Jim Mellon to the port side of the Kursk. Not exactly over the hatch, of course, because gas bubbles escaping the sub could contaminate the air inside the bell. Scott couldn't see the Kursk at all, but he swam toward the bright white ring of the emergency hatch. The Russians had given Scott instructions to tap out a code of 4 sets of 4 on a specific place on the hull. Scott struck the hull 4 times in succession with his hammer. Then again, and again, and again. Scott then leaned forward to rest his diving helmet on the edge of the hatch. This way, Scott wouldn't just hear a cry for help, he could actually feel it. But what would be scarier? Hearing something, or hearing nothing? Scott held his breath and listened. There was only silence. Scott hammered the code again. 16 hits. Perhaps the crew was too weak. Perhaps they were unconscious. Perhaps they were trapped under debris. Perhaps they had suffered a mental breakdown being trapped for 8 days. After 60 seconds, Scott tried a third time. Again, nothing. Hoping against hope, he tried one more time. No response. Dinesen joined Scott and also tapped. Nothing. Silence didn't mean the sailors were dead. They needed absolute proof. But they couldn't just open the hatch and look inside. It would flood the submarine and kill any unconscious survivors. They needed to find out if the escape tower was flooded, check the state of the lower hatch, and then the compartment itself. If the escape trunk was flooded, the compartment below was probably flooded as well. If it was filled with water, it would be very challenging for the LR-5 to mate. The engineers on the Eagle who had studied the hatch figured the divers could open an equalization valve, or E-valve, a little bit to check if water flowed inside. This was the valve that the trapped submariners would use to flood the escape tower to equalize the pressure and open the hatch. If water was sucked in through the valve, the tower was dry. If it wasn't, the tower was flooded. They would use milk to notice any movement of the water. Dinesen's expert eye checked the hatch for damage. He found none. The bad joint between the tiles that Virich had been so excited about was no damage, just a rubber tile that didn't line up correctly. To be sure the hatch wasn't buckled, they placed a straight metal bar across the hull. It was straight as an arrow. It was now time to do the E-valve milk trick to see if the escape tower was flooded. The E-valve would fully open after 11 rotations. All they had to do was open it a little and close it if the milk dye was being sucked through the valve so they wouldn't flood the tower. According to the Russian experts, the valve opened counterclockwise. If they turned it clockwise, it would break, and if it broke, they couldn't stop the water from flowing into the submarine if the lower hatch was open. The sub would flood, and it would end the rescue operation right then and there. Scott tried to open the valve by hand. It wouldn't budge. He used the wrench. It wouldn't budge. Scott needed more leverage, and the engineers quickly welded a tool in the Eagle's workshop, lowered it down with a crane, and delivered it right into Scott's hands. Now Scott had more leverage, but the valve only moved a fraction more. Back to the drawing board. With the divers sitting on the Kursk waiting for instructions, those on the Seaway Eagle put their thinking caps on. Perhaps the valve was already open. If so, someone had opened it from the inside. That someone was still in there, because the hatch was closed. If he was still in there, he would shoot out the moment they opened the hatch. He could hit the divers, or get tangled up in their umbilical cords and cut off the diver's life support. If someone was in there, opening the hatch was a safety hazard. And with so many cameras watching, a video would inevitably get leaked somewhere. If the divers tried to grab the body that had been submerged for some time, it might fall apart in their hands. This would be a distressing sight to the family members, and treating the dead with respect was a top priority. Scott, sitting on the Kursk hull, reached the same conclusion. Someone was inside. They were gonna need something to catch the body. The Seaway Eagle crew rummaged around on the ship and found some heavy mesh safety netting. But if the hatch wasn't flooded and the valve wasn't open, maybe it was jammed. Or maybe, just maybe, the Russian specialists were wrong about which way it opened. Scott tried to turn the E-valve one more time. It was solid. He then asked permission to turn it the other way. The Russians weren't anywhere near, and though they wouldn't be happy, the diving supervisor said, "Okay, Tony, why not turn it in a clockwise direction?" Seconds later, the valve opened. Clockwise it was. Damn it! The Russian experts either didn't know which way the valve turned, or they had lied again. The valve had been closed all this time. There wouldn't be a body trapped in the escape tower. Scott turned the valve little by little, continually checking if water flowed into the escape tower. But after 4 rotations, there was only the slightest movement toward the hatch. The tower seemed to be flooded, but Scott couldn't crank open the hatch for some reason. If the pressure inside and outside was equal, it should swing open. If it didn't, the pressure wasn't equal. To add some pulling power, the divers tied a lifting bag to the upper hatch. They inflated it to apply 500 liters of buoyancy. The hatch remained closed. According to Russian Vice Admiral Valery Ryazantsev, this trick would never have worked, and here is why. The valve at the bottom hatch was always open when the sub was submerged, so the crew inside could see whether the escape hatch was leaking. This milk dye trick couldn't tell the rescuers anything, not whether it was flooded, nor whether it was dry. Maybe the Russians didn't know. Maybe they didn't want to tell the team about the bottom valve being open because they wanted that tower to be flooded. They needed that tower to be flooded. When Admiral Skorgin found out about the valve blunder, he was hella mad. He called Popov and read him the riot act. Divers were risking their lives because the data they had was complete bull. The visibility was fine, the current was fine, the angle of the sub was fine, the escape hatch mating ring was fine, and now they had been given the wrong hatch venting instructions? Skorgin told Popov, "Give us the right information, or we're all gonna stop." Now a boat from the Peter the Great headed toward the Seaway Eagle. Virich was about to be outranked and overruled. Admiral Popov, Commander-in-Chief of the Northern Fleet, stepped aboard the Seaway Eagle, surrounded by a group of staff officers. Popov and Mann were introduced and shook hands. Popov cut right to the chase and said that the Stolt divers were psychologically unfit for the operation. Mann was like, "Say what? Had Virich just told Popov that his divers were frightened?" His team included some of the most experienced and emotionally stable men in the business. Sure, they worried about a dead body because of diver safety, not because his men were spooked. Mann quickly explained that his men had worked on many disasters: the Piper Alpha oil rig disaster, the Alexander Kailan platform. These men had seen horrors far worse than those they would encounter here. Popov gave Virich the side-eye and said, "But your technicians are not adequately trained to work on this submarine. They do not understand the hatch mechanism. They are not technically aware of our systems. Again, say what? The Russian officers didn't even know which way the valves turned, and all the team had were crappy diagrams. Give us the right information and we'll get it done. No one talked to the admiral that way, but he understood that man felt that the Russians had dropped the ball and buried him. Fine. If the Seaway Eagle team wanted to know about the hatch mechanism of an Oscar II submarine, then the team should visit an Oscar II submarine. 2 divers could go on one of the Kursk sister subs, the Oriol, in dry dock in Severomorsk. You could have knocked man over with a feather. Admiral Popov was about to allow 2 Westerners inside one of the Russians' military most sensitive bases to inspect one of their most advanced nuclear submarines. The Moscow hardliners were gonna have a fit, but so be it. Man told dive supervisors Mark Nunkivel and Gary Ball to pack their bags and hurry before the Russians changed their minds. A Norwegian helicopter took them to the Peter the Great, where they waited for a Russian chopper to take them to shore. When Popov came out to greet them, he promised them full access to the aft compartment of the Oriol submarine. Ball wanted to make sure. Will we be able to operate the hatch to see how it works? Yep. Can we look at the internal hatch mechanism? Yep. Can we open the inner hatch too? Yep. Can we take photographs to show the specialists aboard the Seaway Eagle? Yep. Will we be able to speak to engineers and crew members who are familiar with the 9th compartment? Absolutely. Well, that was easy. After an hour-long flight, the men arrived at the military airfield at Severomorsk at 10:40 that Sunday evening. Ball and Nunkivel spent an hour working aboard the Project 949A Antioch-class Oriol. They received a hands-on demonstration of the rescue system and sketched the hatch mechanism. They also examined the internal pipework in case they needed to cut their way into the Kursk. They also noticed how small the 9th compartment actually was. Before they left, the Oriol's chief manager quietly passed on a vital piece of information. Whenever the Oscar IIs were stationary, water leaked into the 9th compartment via the propeller shaft valves. When the submarine was secured alongside a pier, they used the clamp to stop the leak. Plugging from the inside would not be possible. So, that's why none of the sailors had tried to escape the Kursk. Their bodies were saturated days ago. If they had tried to surface, they would have succumbed to the bends. With the situation of the escape tower being unclear, Graham Mann tried to persuade the Russians to deploy the LR-5. It was useless if the tower was flooded, but vital if the tower was dry. Late on Sunday evening, a crisis summit began on the Seaway Eagle. The Russians now said out loud what they had been thinking all along. The British would use the LR-5 to spy on the Kursk. Sure. Anyway, launch the damn LR-5. The official Navy log of the meeting noted the Admiral's response. Admiral Virich expressed gratitude to the UK and Norway for their help. He rated the LR-5 highly, but he believed that the slow flow rate around the hatch meant that the submarine was full of water and that there was now no chance of life. He wished the upper lid and the lower lid to be opened to make the situation clear. Virich wanted the Norwegians to just rip off the hatch with a crane. The Norwegians said no. Virich said yes. The Norwegians said no. We can do this all night, y'all. But a few minutes later, Virich was told that Popov was on the line. He took the call outside the conference room. When he returned to his seat, he was super accommodating. Popov had ordered him to allow the deployment of the LR-5. A full 9 days after the Kursk hit the seafloor, the final attempt would be made to rescue the survivors. At 2 a.m. Monday, the 21st of August, the Normand Pioneer with the LR-5 minisub started moving toward the accident site. In a few hours, at 7 o'clock Monday morning, they would have a technical meeting aboard the Norman Pioneer. They would launch the LR-5 about 3 hours later. At 6 a.m. Monday morning, Ball and Nankivel returned to the Seaway Eagle, where they gave the divers an Oscar II hatch crash course. No one was watching as the hatch spontaneously swung open at dawn on Monday. During low tide Monday morning, the top hatch, pulled upward by the buoyancy bag, had swung open against its own weight. There were no divers around the stern of the Kursk at the time. Even the ROVs had been pulled out of the water for maintenance and sat on the Eagle's deck. At the bottom of the flooded tower, they could see the lower hatch, the last door into the submarine. The team prepared to open it. Welders in the Eagle's workshop made a tool for one of the ROVs to open the lower hatch remotely. At 10:30 a.m., the lower hatch dropped open. Large pockets of gas belched violently out of the compartment. The bubbles spewed up for minutes. The submarine appeared to be exhaling her final breath. The 9th compartment was now officially flooded. Because they just flooded it. It would not have belched up air for minutes if it had been flooded. But this was not breathable air. This was the severely compressed air full of carbon dioxide. This was it. All hope was gone. It was over. The crew of the Kursk was lost. As the bubbles reached the surface, it was as if the souls of the sailors were set free. On Tuesday morning, all flags were lowered on the ships and the vessels of the Northern Fleet in honor of the lost crew of the K-141, the Kursk. The night before, Admiral Popov had requested Norwegian assistance to bring out the casualties from the Kursk. Should they? This was not part of the agreed-upon plan. The divers felt, though, that it might bring closure to at least some of the families and started thinking about how they could do it. But Tuesday morning, Stolt managers put an end to their plans. This was a rescue mission, not a recovery operation. The divers were absolutely forbidden from entering the wreck. But everyone was curious to look inside the submarine. A few hours later, Stolt divers lowered a small video camera down the escape tower and into the 9th compartment. The visibility was awful. A dense, dark fog hung in the flooded compartment. The bulkhead and the walls were blackened. The paintwork was cracked and blistered. There had been a fire. The water was hazy because of the ash floating in it. This meant that the crew could have died from carbon monoxide instead of carbon dioxide poisoning. When the camera captured the image of a dead body, they stopped filming. Before they left, the divers extracted a small amount of gas from an air pocket on the ceiling of the 9th compartment and analyzed its chemical composition. The carbon monoxide level was a lethal 2.3%. The divers had to do one last thing: seal off the Kursk. The Westerners waited for permission to leave the scene. First, surprisingly, Commodore David Russell was invited to attend lunch on the Peter the Great with the admirals. Russell couldn't pass up the opportunity to visit the Northern Fleet's flagship and, more importantly, meet the top admirals. The reception line was impressive. There was the commander of the Northern Fleet, Admiral Popov, commander of the Russian Navy, Admiral Kuryedov, and Russia's Deputy Prime Minister, Ilya Klebanov. There were salutes and handshakes, but no smiles. Popov seemed in shock. Kuryedov gave a short speech. "Welcome aboard. I want to thank you personally for your offer of help. This is a tragic day for the Russian Navy and for the Russian people. There is heartfelt gratitude from our government for the British rescue effort." Russell nodded in sympathy, but damn, they'd wasted a lot of time getting to this place. At 2 p.m., Popov gave formal clearance for the 2 Western rescue ships to head home. The Seaway Eagle crew cast a wreath and departed. As the vessel passed through the swarm of Russian vessels, the Eagle's Captain Rasmussen sounded the horn in one long blast. A farewell to the Northern Fleet. The warships did not respond. Back on the Normand Pioneer, finally over the wreck site, Russell gathered his men on deck and said a few words in memory of the Kursk submariners, and they left as well. The Admiral Chubenyenka would accompany them from the area as a sign of honor. As the Pioneer started heading home, the Russian anti-submarine ship caught up with them at an impressive 30 knots. As she passed them, the Russian crew manned and cheered ship. A naval custom in which the entire ship's company gathers on the deck and roars their gratitude to another vessel. It was an awe-inspiring goosebump moment for the Brits. But then a radio reporter in the fleet ruined the moment by reporting that the British were leaving because their spying mission was now complete. Slowly but surely, the other ships of the Northern Fleet left the scene. The hydrography survey vessel Mars and a rotating escort of 2 warships remained at the site. The Mars monitored the area for radiation. The warships were there to make sure no one started fishing over the Kursk and accidentally set off a torpedo, or to protect the site from American spies. Take a pick. A buoy marked the precise location. They would be back. Vice Admiral Motsak officially announced that the submarine was flooded. All 118 crew members on board the Kursk were dead. He expressed his condolences to their relatives. Motsak now said that the British were responsible for the collision. Admiral Popov appeared on national television to give a statement. The Admiral stood on the deck of the Peter the Great. "A great misfortune has opened the doors of your homes. The crew is not to blame for what happened. The circumstances were so catastrophic that after the collision, I'm sure it was a collision, most of the crew did not survive even for 3 minutes. The Northern Fleet has lost its best submarine crew. We did everything in our power and more than that. 3,000 sailors of the Northern Fleet were trying to rescue the ship and her crew. Circumstances overwhelmed us. This is the shared fate for submariners. On such a boat, everyone lives or everyone dies. Grief embraces us, but life must go on. Continue to bring up your children and your sons. I will spend the rest of my life to find the person who organized this tragedy, to look him in the eye." Then he did something that broke with Russian military tradition. He apologized to the Russian people. Popov, now crying, looked into the camera, removed his naval cap. "Forgive me for not bringing back your boys. Forgive me for not saving your men." Admiral Skorgin reached out to Popov one last time to express his regret about the outcome of the mission. Klebanov was already thinking of ways to recover the bodies and raise the Kursk, but no one had ever lifted a nuclear submarine off of the sea floor. But first things first, Putin had to deal with the political fallout of the disaster. He had a 3-step plan to reassert his power and get control of the situation. First, meet with the families. Second, apologize for the mess and offer money. Third, silence the critics. Step 1. He would fly to the Kola Peninsula, visit Vijayeva, and speak to the families in person.